The inflatable scraped against shingle. 4 men froze, listening. Waves whined through coastal grass. Nothing else. September 1940. The Kent coast, 3 miles south of Dungeness Lighthouse. Werner Walti went first, stepping into ankle-deep water, scanning the dark beach. Behind him, Karl Meyer helped drag the boat higher. Jose Waldberg and Charles van den Kuyboom followed, carrying equipment cases wrapped in oilcloth. Quickly, Walti whispered in German. We have maybe 10 minutes before patrol. They'd rehearsed this in Hamburg for 6 weeks. Land. Hide the boat. Split into pairs. Reach London separately. Meyer and Walti would pose as refugees from Holland. Waldberg and Kuyboom would claim to be Belgian businessmen. Different cover stories, different targets, same objective, locate and transmit coordinates of aircraft factories in the Midlands. Meyer struggled with his case, breathing hard. The crossing from occupied France had taken 4 hours in rough seas. All of them were sick, exhausted, desperate for solid ground. There, Kuyboom pointed to a gap in the shoreline vegetation. We hide the boat there, yes? Walti nodded. They hauled the inflatable toward the scrub, but Waldberg's foot caught on something, a stake driven into the sand. He stumbled, his case hitting the shingle with a crack that sounded impossibly loud in the silence. Everyone froze again. German defenders faced impossible odds. The Wehrmacht had been bled white by years of warfare on multiple fronts. Experienced combat units had been destroyed in earlier campaigns, leaving Berlin's defense to a hodgepodge of forces including elderly Volkssturm militia, Hitler Youth teenagers, scattered SS units, and remnants of regular army divisions. Despite shortages of ammunition, fuel, and heavy weapons, these defenders prepared to contest every street corner. The city's defensive preparations reflected both desperation and determination. Anti-tank obstacles sprouted throughout Berlin's boulevards and intersections. Barricades constructed from streetcars, furniture, and rubble blocked major thoroughfares. Buildings were fortified with sandbags and reinforced to serve as strongpoints. Civilians dug trenches in parks and public squares. Windows overlooking key approaches became firing positions for riflemen and Panzerfaust anti-tank teams. When Soviet infantry and tanks entered Berlin's outskirts, they encountered fierce resistance that slowed their advance to a crawl. German defenders used the urban terrain to their advantage, ambushing Soviet columns from buildings and side streets. Young boys armed with Panzerfausts knocked out Soviet tanks at close range before disappearing into ruined buildings. Snipers picked off Soviet soldiers from upper-story windows and church steeples. Each apartment block became a fortress requiring systematic assault. The Soviets adapted their tactics to the brutal reality of urban combat. Instead of advancing in large formations, they organized small assault groups combining infantry, engineers, and artillery. These groups would isolate individual buildings, bombard them with direct fire from tanks and artillery pieces, then storm inside with grenades and submachine guns. Flamethrowers cleared rooms and bunkers. Combat engineers blasted passages through walls to avoid exposed streets. Buildings changed hands multiple times as fighting surged back and forth. Soviet troops would capture a structure after fierce fighting, only to face German counterattacks hours later. Cellars became battlegrounds where soldiers fought hand-to-hand in darkness. Stairwells echoed with grenade blasts and automatic weapons fire. The distinction between frontline and rear area ceased to exist as combat erupted unpredictably across the city. Civilians trapped in Berlin endured unimaginable hardships. Many sheltered in basements and subway tunnels as artillery and aerial bombardment pulverized buildings above. Food and water grew scarce. Medical supplies ran out. Fires started by incendiary shells spread uncontrolled through neighborhoods. Those who ventured outside risked death from shellfire, sniper bullets, or summary execution by fanatical SS patrols hunting deserters. The subway system became an underground city where thousands sought refuge from the chaos above. Families huddled in stations and tunnels, listening to the muffled thunder of explosions overhead. When German defenders attempted to slow the Soviet advance by flooding the tunnels, the results proved catastrophic. Water rushed through underground passages, drowning those unable to escape and destroying the last refuge many had left. Soviet troops faced their own challenges beyond German resistance. Supply lines struggled to keep pace with the advance, creating shortages of ammunition and provisions. Casualties mounted steadily as German defenders extracted a heavy price for every block. The close-quarters nature of urban fighting negated Soviet advantages in tanks and artillery, while maximizing German strengths in defensive combat. Victory came measured in meters rather than kilometers. As Soviet forces penetrated deeper into Berlin's heart, certain locations took on symbolic significance. The Reichstag building, seat of Germany's pre-war parliament, became a primary objective. Capturing this structure would provide powerful propaganda value, demonstrating the Soviet conquest of Nazi power. German defenders recognized its importance and fortified the Reichstag extensively, turning it into a formidable strongpoint. The battle for the Reichstag exemplified the intensity of fighting throughout Berlin. Soviet assault groups attacked the building repeatedly, fighting room by room against determined defenders. Combat raged through hallways and chambers filled with rubble and bodies. Soviet soldiers raised their flag over the building multiple times, only to have it shot down by German fire. The final successful flag raising became one of the war's most iconic images, though it occurred after the building's capture was essentially complete. Hitler spent the battle's final days in his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery garden. As Soviet forces closed in from all directions, the Nazi leader issued increasingly unrealistic orders to non-existent armies and divisions that existed only on maps. He alternated between rage at perceived betrayals and delusions about miraculous relief forces that would never arrive. The bunker became a surreal environment where military commanders brought news of defeat while maintaining facades of normalcy. The German High Command recognized the hopelessness of Berlin's situation but lacked authority to surrender. Hitler refused to consider capitulation, instead issuing orders for fanatical resistance and threatening execution for anyone suggesting otherwise. Generals who attempted to advocate for realistic approaches faced dismissal or worse. The Nazi regime's grip on power persisted even as that power crumbled around it. Outside the bunker, Berlin's agony continued. Artillery fire never ceased completely, ranging across the city at all hours. Tank battles erupted in boulevards and parks. Infantry firefights crackled through ruined neighborhoods. The wounded overwhelmed makeshift hospitals operating in cellars without proper supplies. Bodies lay unburied in streets and buildings. The city that had once embodied Nazi power now represented its complete collapse. Soviet forces gradually compressed the defensive perimeter around Berlin's government district. German units found themselves squeezed into an ever-shrinking area with their backs against the Spree River. Ammunition stocks dwindled to nothing. Food ran out. Communications between units broke down. Despite these conditions, fighting continued with surprising intensity as some German soldiers and SS fanatics refused to accept the inevitable. On the last day of April, Hitler committed suicide in his bunker rather than face capture. His death removed the primary obstacle to surrender negotiations, though fighting continued for another day as news spread slowly through disrupted communication networks. German commanders in various parts of Berlin began seeking terms independently, leading to piecemeal surrenders across different sectors. The formal capitulation came on May 2 when the city's garrison commander surrendered Berlin's remaining defenders. Gunfire gradually subsided as Soviet troops accepted German surrenders sector by sector. Silence descended over the ruined capital for the first time in weeks, broken only by isolated shots from holdouts unaware the battle had ended or unwilling to acknowledge defeat. The aftermath revealed Berlin's complete devastation. Entire neighborhoods lay in ruins, reduced to fields of rubble and skeletal building frames. Major landmarks stood damaged or destroyed. Infrastructure had ceased functioning. Water mains broken by bombardment flooded streets. Gas leaks created fire hazards. Bodies buried in collapsed buildings would take months to recover. The city that had been Hitler's showpiece lay shattered and conquered. Soviet casualties in the Berlin operation exceeded 300,000 dead, wounded, and missing. German military and civilian deaths likely numbered similar or higher, though exact figures remain disputed. These losses occurred over roughly 2 weeks of intense combat, making the Battle of Berlin one of the costliest urban battles ever fought. The price of victory was measured in tens of thousands of lives. The battle's conclusion marked the effective end of World War II in Europe. Though fighting continued in isolated pockets for days afterward, Germany's capacity for organized resistance had collapsed with Berlin's fall. Nazi leaders either committed suicide, went into hiding, or sought to negotiate separate surrenders with Western allies. The regime that had promised thousand-year dominion lasted barely 12 years before destroying itself and the nation it ruled. Berlin's ruins became a symbol of Nazi Germany's total defeat. The city that had hosted massive rallies celebrating Hitler's regime now stood as testament to its catastrophic failure. Streets where Wehrmacht troops once paraded victoriously after conquering European capitals now witnessed Soviet tanks and soldiers occupying what remained. The transformation was complete and undeniable. For ordinary Berliners, the battle's end brought mixed emotions. Relief at survival mingled with trauma from weeks of terror. Grief over lost family members competed with gratitude for living through the nightmare. The challenge of rebuilding shattered lives amid physical and psychological devastation seemed overwhelming. Food remained scarce. Housing was destroyed. Normal social structures had broken down. Soviet occupation forces established control over their conquest while dealing with their own challenges. Maintaining order among victorious troops proved difficult as some soldiers engaged in looting and assault. Military authorities struggled to restore basic services to the civilian population. The political task of establishing a new government began even as rubble still smoldered. Berlin's future remained uncertain beyond its present destruction. The battle demonstrated urban warfare's unique horrors. Cities offered defenders countless advantages that nullified attacker superiority in numbers and firepower. Buildings provided cover and firing positions. Rubble created obstacles to tanks and vehicles. Civilian presence complicated military operations. The close-quarters nature of street fighting favored defenders and increased casualties on both sides. These lessons would be relearned in subsequent urban battles throughout the 20th century. Contemporary footage and photographs captured the battle's reality with stark clarity. Images showed Soviet artillery batteries firing from parklands, their crews working mechanically to maintain bombardment rates. Tanks rolled through streets lined with burning buildings, their commanders scanning for threats from windows and doorways. Infantry moved cautiously through debris-filled boulevards, weapons at ready. Dead soldiers lay where they fell, testimony to combat's brutal randomness. The civilian experience appeared in photographs of families emerging from shelters into devastated neighborhoods, their faces showing exhaustion and shock. Women stood in bread lines amid ruins, waiting for meager rations. Children played in rubble that had been their homes. Elderly residents sat on fragments of walls, surveying destruction too vast to comprehend. These images humanized the battle beyond military movements and strategic objectives. German surrender photographs showed soldiers emerging from defensive positions with hands raised, faces haggard from weeks of combat and privation. Some appeared relieved to have survived. Others looked defeated and traumatized. Young Hitler Youth fighters barely in their teens stood among Wehrmacht veterans. The variety of uniforms and ages reflected Berlin's desperate last-ditch defense, incorporating whoever could hold a weapon. Victory celebrations among Soviet troops revealed jubilation tempered by exhaustion. Soldiers climbed atop the Brandenburg Gate brandishing weapons and flags. Red banners appeared on damaged buildings across the city. Yet celebration was muted by the battle's cost and soldiers' weariness. Many had fought across Eastern Europe for years, seeing countless comrades killed. Berlin's capture meant survival and vindication, but not erasure of war's accumulated trauma. The battle's strategic significance extended beyond Berlin itself. The city's capture eliminated Nazi Germany's political and military leadership, making continued organized resistance impossible. It demonstrated Soviet military capability to Western allies, establishing the USSR as Europe's dominant power. The division of Germany and Berlin into occupation zones planted seeds for the Cold War that would dominate international relations for decades. Tactically, the Battle of Berlin showcased both urban warfare's challenges and methods for overcoming them. Soviet forces refined assault group tactics that became doctrine for future urban operations. The importance of combined arms coordination in city fighting was reinforced. Lessons about civilian complications, infrastructure challenges, and the psychological toll of urban combat would influence military thinking long afterward. The human cost transcended statistics. Every casualty represented a life ended or forever changed. Families lost fathers, sons, and brothers. Women endured assault and trauma. Children witnessed violence that would haunt them for life. Survivors carried physical and psychological scars decades later. The battle's legacy lived on in broken bodies and damaged minds long after guns fell silent. Berlin's physical reconstruction took years, but psychological healing required generations. The city gradually rose from ruins, but memories of April 1945 remained embedded in its identity. Bullet-scarred buildings preserved as memorials reminded later generations of the battle's ferocity. Stories passed down kept experiences alive when participants could no longer speak. History absorbed the battle as a defining moment in the 20th century's most destructive conflict. The Battle of Berlin represented the final act in Nazi Germany's apocalyptic collapse. What began with grandiose promises of racial dominion and territorial expansion ended in complete military defeat and national destruction. The regime that started the war by invading Poland in 1939 perished amid the rubble of its own capital. The symmetry was poetic, but purchased at immense cost in lives and suffering.